Hey there, my name is Terry with True Marie Soapworks. A while back I made a mountain soap and I mentioned that I would show you how I calculated the percentages I used for each layer. This estimating layer percentage method is good for any design that you can draw up on graph paper. Okay, let's get started. First, let's see what kind of space I'm working with. In order to figure out your design shape and size, you have to measure the mold. In this case, my mold is 2.5 by 3.5, and I'm filling this mold all the way to the top, so my design will be those same dimensions. But in some cases, if you're not filling the mold to the top, you would use the actual height of the design you want. Next, I drew the 2.5 by 3.5 inch rectangle on graph paper. Then I decided where I wanted to situate the mountains. You can do the same thing with metric measurements by using metric graph paper. Next, I did the best I could to count the squares in each layer accurately. I counted the full squares first, and then I paired the partial squares together to make full squares by writing the number in the fuller square and then coloring in the piece or pieces that completed that square. So if the square was 2/3 full, I wrote the number in the 2/3 one, and then I found another square that was 1/3 full, and I filled that square in to denote that it had been counted. So for this first layer, I estimated that there were 22 squares. So for this number 17, I estimated that this other square next to it would equal a full square. So I just colored that in. And then for this number 18, I did the same thing. I estimated that that one above the 15 equals the full square for the number 18. And so on. I even used partial squares. So for this number 19, since it's just a little corner, I took out a little part of that one. And then for number 20, it's just a little wedge, so I took a little wedge out of that one, and so on until I got what I think is pretty close to the number of squares in that level. And then I did the same thing for the remaining 4 layers. Every time I finished counting a layer, I wrote the number beside the layer. Now that I've finished estimating my layers, I go ahead and add those numbers up. I got a total of 139. After that, I take each one of those layer values and divide it by the total layer value. And then that gives you the decimal. To get your percentage, just move your decimal point to the right 2 places. Once you've done that, make sure that your percentages add up to 100%. One thing to note here is that I actually have 140 squares, but I came up with my estimate total to be 139. That's going to happen. It's very hard to estimate and then get that exact total of number of squares. I still went with the 139 as my total. Now that I have calculated all the percentages and they add up to 100, I have my estimated layer percentages. If you're making sculpted soap and you're using soap shapers or scrapers, you're going to need to overestimate the amount of batter so that you have something to scrape. If you look at the pink mold there, that's how much soap I have left over. To calculate the weight of soap that I needed for this batch, I used 15% over the amount that I would normally use for this mold. So to get that starting oil amount for my recipe, I take the normal oil weight that I use for that mold, and then I multiply that by 1.15 to get my 15% increase. And that's your new oil weight. If you look at my scrapes and if you look at that amount that I had left over and you think you would rather have a bigger buffer zone than that, you can up that number to higher than 15%. Most layer soaps require you to split off your oils and your lye separately. For splitting off the oils, I add any additives that I want to have in there that I don't want to individually measure out later. In this case, I did add the fragrance since it's well behaved, and I also added kaolin clay. Next, to calculate the weight of what's in the bowl,
bowl, I weigh the bowl and the contents. Then I subtract the bowl's weight, which I recorded earlier. And from that, I just calculate the percentages that I need for each layer.
And note that if you added any ingredient like kaolin clay, it will sink to the bottom and you have to give it a good stick blend before you divide off your oils.
Typically in layer soap designs, I make up the lye solution and divide it once it's cooled.
That would include the water, sodium hydroxide, and the sodium lactate.
But today I'm adding the indigo colorant directly to the lye solution. Since each layer has less indigo than the previous layer, I'm making up different lye solutions for each layer.
For example, as we calculated earlier, the bottom layer is 16%, so I multiply the water weight by 16%, and then I multiply the sodium hydroxide weight by 16%. And you do the same thing for your remaining layers. Make sure you label your containers so that you remember which layer is which. If you're using sodium lactate, the same would apply. You would take that full measurement that you need for the full batch. In this case, it's 4.4 teaspoons. To make this easier, I converted that to milliliters, so that's 21.6 milliliters. Then multiplied by 16% equals 3.5 milliliters. If you're not adding your color like I did with this indigo color, adding it to the lye, more likely you would split your lye solution after you've added the sodium lactate to the cooled lye solution, like I did in the marble soap video. You calculate that the same way you calculated the oils. Weigh the container and the contents, subtract the container weight, and then you're left with the contents weight. Take the contents weight, multiply that by each of your percentages that you calculated earlier, then you have each individual layer weight for your lye solution. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, please hit the like button if you'd like to see more like this. Also, if there's anything that I didn't address in this video that you still have questions, please leave those in the comments below. And if you have any ideas for future videos, please write those down below too. I love hearing from you. Thank you for being here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe and hit the bell so you won't miss my next video. Okay, I'll see you back here next time. Have a wonderful day and happy soaping.